Let's get right into this explainer. Today, we are looking into a psychological mirror provided by a completely vanished ancient world. We're not talking about external threats here, or societal collapse, or ancient horrors lurking in the dark. Instead, we're going to explore something much closer to home. We are looking at the specific, deeply uncomfortable phenomenology of self-betrayal. We are asking, what actually happens to the human mind when you live in sustained contradiction to what you know to be true? To really grasp this, we have to look to the ancient landscapes of the Zagros Mountains and the city of Susa. This was the heart of the Elamite civilization, a highly complex society that rose around 3200 BCE in what is now southwestern Iran. But I want to make something absolutely clear right from the start. This civilization was utterly eradicated in 647 BCE by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. I mean, it was wiped off the map. There are zero living practitioners of its traditions today. None.
Because this culture vanished millennia ago, all that survives are fragments. We have clay oath tablets, cylinder seals, the ruins of ancient ziggurats. So we are examining purely legendary archetypal symbols from a dead world. But we're going to view these symbols strictly through the precise, uncomfortable lens of modern moral psychology and integrity research. Why? Because what the Elamites mapped out wasn't just ancient mythology. It was a profoundly sophisticated framework of the human psyche.
So let's look at the actual architecture of integrity they mapped out. And specifically, let's decipher a concept they called the Kiten. In Elamite cosmology, the legendary concept of the Kiten represented a protective spiritual field that kept the psyche integrated against intrusive thoughts and madness. Visually, you can kind of imagine it as this barely visible, luminous aura surrounding a person. But this wasn't magic. It was a structural necessity. It was the psychological structure that literally kept your own internal material organized. It filtered out the nightmares, the destructive impulses, the chaos of the underworld, so you could maintain your daily psychological coherence. Now, overseeing all of this, the archetypal figure of Inshushinak embodied a philosophically coherent dual role. He was simultaneously the guardian of oaths in life and the judge of the dead. Just think about the psychological exactness of that for a second. The keeper of promises in your daily life is the exact same force that evaluates the integrity of your soul at the end of it. He didn't just punish oathbreakers, he was the one who administered the removal of that protective kiten. And here's the really crucial detail. This luminous protection, it was never passive. It wasn't something you were just handed and got to keep no matter what you did. It was a highly active structure that required constant maintenance through strict moral consistency. To keep your chitin intact, you had to act in accordance with who you actually knew yourself to be. You had to live without the sustained performance of a false self. This brings us to the anatomy of self-betrayal, and honestly, the most morally vertiginous aspect of their entire cosmology, how this protective field actually breaks. The absolute most important thing to grasp here is that external enemies, physical danger, illness, they absolutely cannot crack the kitten. You could be entirely defeated by an outside force, and your psychological integrity would remain completely intact. The protective field only fractures under the weight of your own sustained self-betrayal. You, and only you, hold the key to breaking your own psychological protection.
In this framework, taking a sacred oath wasn't just, making a promise to do a thing. It was an identity commitment. You were publicly declaring the values that constituted who you were. And when a gap opens up between your declared self, what you commit to being, and your acting self, how you actually behave over time, well, that's when the psychic structure fails. The oath is the foundation, and your actions are the weight it bears. And the way it breaks is absolutely fascinating. It's not this dramatic, fiery explosion. It is a precise, incredibly quiet fracture. It happens step by step. First, you break a commitment. Then, you begin to morally perform a false self to cover it up. You live in an extended state of contradiction to your own nature. And finally, a single fracture line opens in the chitin, just one precise crack in an otherwise completely intact protective field.
So what happens when you collapse from the inside? Once that single fracture line opens, what actually enters through that gap? Well, the consequences for the psyche are devastating. As the protective field naturally withdraws because of that integrity violation, the psyche undergoes a gradual erosion. It essentially dissolves from the inside out. The fears that you used to be able to suppress easily suddenly become completely unmanageable. The intrusive thoughts that the chitin used to filter out now just continuously penetrate your mind. You lose all certainty about who you actually are, and it gets replaced by this consuming, paralyzing doubt. The terrifying psychological exactness of this system is that you don't need an external demon to destroy you. The underworld forces that leak in through that crack aren't alien monsters. They're your own uncontained suppressed material, your own self-knowledge, the fears you've been ignoring, the truths you were avoiding. That is exactly what rushes in through the crack that you made.
Because the kitten was really only managing the psychological structure that kept your own internal darkness organized. It kept things manageable. But once it cracks, your worst material is animated solely by you. You essentially self-destruct from within, consumed by what was always inside you, which is now no longer contained simply because you broke the very structure designed to hold it.
Now, we can look at the science of this fracture, because this isn't just ancient myth. This 3,000-year-old framework describing the phenomenology of self-betrayal translates with deeply uncomfortable precision into modern clinical diagnostics. What the Kiten framework maps onto is what we now call moral injury, severe cognitive dissonance, and the devastating access of the unfiltered inner critic. When modern psychologists research moral injury, they aren't looking at standard trauma from something happening to you. They are looking at the specific damage done to the psyche by acting against what one knows to be right. Those underworld spirits the Elamites talked about, that's just ancient terminology for an inner critic that has been given unlimited access to a broken psyche. It also brilliantly illustrates Donald Winnicott's 20th century developmental psychology framework. Winnicott wrote extensively about the true self, our authentic expression, versus the false self, the protective persona we build. The Elamites knew millennia ago that if you engage in the sustained performance of a false self, eventually your true self becomes completely inaccessible, and it takes your genuine motivation and meaning right along with it. They understood that psychological protection is an active, demanding structure. It depends entirely on absolute coherence between who you are and what you do. It took modern psychology a long time to articulate what this vanished civilization already knew for a fact: that your mental stability is intrinsically linked to your moral consistency. Falsify that coherence, and the protection fails. This leaves us with a lingering fracture of our own, a profound question of coherence, and the specific discomfort of recognizing ourselves in the archetypes of a dead civilization. Staring at the concept of the Kiten forces us to examine the spaces in our own lives where our moral performances have quietly replaced our authentic actions. It asks us to look closely at our own fracture lines. We have to ask, what happens when the gap between the declared self and the acting self isn't just a temporary mistake, but becomes a permanent state of being? The ancient ruins of Susa are long gone, but the human psyche hasn't changed a bit. So what is the exact relationship between what you commit to being and how you actually act? And what does this 3,000-year-old tradition tell us about what is happening to your psyche right now if those two things stop matching? I leave you to sit with that question and the deeply uncomfortable silence that follows.